Beneath the smoke and steel of the last Great War, shadows moved in silence. Files buried, missions erased, voices swallowed by the weight of secrecy. What surfaced in reports was only the surface of a deeper abyss, where whispers have vanished, ships, coded transmissions, and nameless operatives pointed to truths never meant to see daylight. Tonight, those fragments resurface, like wrecks rising from a dark seabed, carrying with them the chill of questions no archive dared to answer. On the morning of 12th June 1942, under heavy skies and a worsening Mediterranean swell, a joint British and Allied convoy known as Operation Harpoon departed Gibraltar, bound for the besieged island of Malta. The convoy, a lifeline for Malta's starving garrison, consisted of 6 merchant vessels under escort from 2 Royal Navy battleships, 2 aircraft carriers, several destroyers, and smaller anti-submarine craft. Official records confirm that only 2 merchant ships ultimately reached Grand Harbour, with the remainder sunk in a gauntlet of Axis air and naval attacks. What those records do not disclose, however, is the fate of one vessel listed in early planning documents, the SS Chant, a small cargo steamer refitted in Liverpool in early 1942 for special consignment. Archival fragments from the Admiralty's Operations Division, recently unearthed in the UK National Archives under file ADM 2123-14, contain faint pencil notations next to Chant's name. Carry new sets, treat with utmost discretion. Cross-referencing with Signal Corps memoranda from the same period suggests the consignment may have included prototype Type 79B air warning radar components stripped from trials in Dorset and urgently destined for Malta to counter the constant Axis raids. A surviving dockyard manifest from Gibraltar dated 11th June, curiously missing its final page, references timber crates, electrical gear, priority. The surviving records list these crates as boarded onto Chant, yet the vessel does not appear in the final Admiralty communiqué summarizing Harpoon's outcome. Testimonies from surviving sailors decades later provide chilling corroboration. In 1969, during an oral history project at the Imperial War Museum, Petty Officer Harold Line of HMS Bedouin recalled an odd little freighter, running dark, ordered out of columns somewhere south of Sardinia. Line insisted the freighter had broken away on direct signal, not from Allied command, but from shadowy fast craft off the beam, running very low in the water. His recollection was dismissed at the time as confusion under fire, but similar testimony emerged in 1975 when able seaman Robert H. Callahan, a Harpoon veteran emigrated to Canada, described an unmarked vessel signaling Chant by lamp just before dawn, then both slipped westward. Callahan added that his subsequent attempt to log this sighting was erased from the ship's records during debriefing at Scapa Flow. The fate of Chant became the subject of internal inquiry. Declassified minutes from a July 1942 Admiralty meeting, found in FO 371-3184, note the loss of a certain merchant unit, possible special cargo, and emphasize the need to refrain from further investigation at staff level. After this point, references to Chant cease entirely. She does not appear in post-war Lloyd's shipping registers, nor is she listed among confirmed sinkings by Axis aircraft or submarines. Axis archives, including captured Luftwaffe Flugmeldungen, air combat reports, make no mention of a ship resembling Chant destroyed during Harpoon. This conspicuous absence suggests the vessel never completed her declared route. Speculation hardened into rumor in post-war intelligence circles. One CIA memorandum dated 1954, CIA RDP 78 0471, AA Zazo 7 Hauso 4007 3, partially declassified, refers to anomalous reports of British merchant freighter intercepted by non-Italian, non-German naval units in the Sicilian Channel, 1942. A later annotation by a CIA analyst in 1963 underlined the words non-German twice, followed by a hand-drawn question mark. The document suggests an interest in unidentified third-party naval assets active in contested waters. Though the memo's context remains incomplete, Certain researchers argue these fast craft may have been Spanish auxiliary boats operating covertly for Axis intelligence. Others point toward irregular Vichy French naval activity, yet no hard evidence confirms either. The most troubling element is the cargo itself. Type 79B radar was an early but crucial technology, enabling detection of incoming air raids at greater range. Had such equipment fallen into Axis hands in 1942, the impact on the air war could have been significant. Post-war Luftwaffe technical reports from 1943 demonstrate an abrupt sophistication in radar countermeasures, including Doppelweitig chaff, deployment and frequency interference studies months earlier than previously believed possible. Some Allied analysts at the time suspected espionage, but whether this derived from chance lost shipment remains unproven. Families of Chant's crew, recorded as 32 merchant sailors, most from Liverpool, received no formal notification beyond the vague phrase "lost at sea," presumed due to enemy action. No memorial plaque at Tower Hill lists the ship, an anomaly explained by clerical error. In 1982, an independent researcher, Commander John Crossland, RN, Ret, discovered Chant's keel number referenced in wartime shipyard papers, but noted the absence of any confirmed wreck location. Italian divers operating in the Sicilian Channel during the 1970s claimed to have discovered an uncharted wreck resembling a British freighter. But when coordinates were offered to the Admiralty, correspondence shows officials replied, "No, further action required." A final lead appears in an obscure NATO document from 1957 regarding maritime intelligence, catalogued as AC-119-D27. The file includes a map of the Sicilian Channel with a red-inked circle marked Zone N and a handwritten note, "Chant, but removed." Nothing further explains this cryptic remark. Subsequent attempts to access related NATO files result in denials on grounds of continuing security relevance. Operation Harpoon's history remains one of loss, sacrifice, and strategic necessity. Yet beneath the surface of its already tragic narrative lies a second story, one erased from conventional accounts, buried in fragmented reports, and whispered only in classified corridors. Whether the SS Chant slipped into enemy hands, was destroyed in unrecorded action, or became part of a more complex intelligence war is a question unanswered after more than 8 decades. What is certain is that her name was deliberately omitted from official histories, her crew forgotten, her cargo unacknowledged, and her fate consigned to the silence of sealed archives. In the Mediterranean, where countless wrecks still rest in darkness, Chant may yet lie, unmarked and unclaimed, holding within her rusted hull the truth of a vanished consignment that officialdom still refuses to recognize. On the night of 18th of December 1944, amid the chaos of the Ardennes offensive, an otherwise routine US Signal Corps monitoring station near Reims intercepted a burst of encrypted radio traffic. Operators assigned to the 849th Signal Intelligence Service Battalion noted the transmission's unusual modulation. Short, staccato bursts with irregular pauses, suggesting experimental cipher practice rather than standard Wehrmacht Enigma traffic. The intercept log, catalogued as Reims Bravo Intercept 44-18-2240, traced the source not to the expected Wehrmacht command nodes near Koblenz or Bonn, but to an improbable point, the perimeter of the Buchenwald concentration camp, outside Weimar. The discovery triggered confusion within the Allied monitoring network. Concentration camps were not considered operational military installations, yet direction-finding triangulation confirmed the origin zone within a 2-kilometer radius of Buchenwald's northern watchtowers. Further transmissions occurred over the following weeks, always late at night, always on irregular frequencies between 8.3 and 9.1 MHz. The decrypt sections at Bletchley Park logged them under a provisional code name: Project Ule, Project Owl. At the time, the Signal Corps could not break the cipher. What struck analysts, however, was the content's rhythm. Unlike Enigma's tightly patterned traffic, the Ule messages pulsed in erratic waves, as though layered with bursts of static intentionally woven into the signal. A 1945 technical memo from the Royal Air Force Telecommunications Research Establishment, TRE 1945-67, speculated that the transmissions might not have been conventional command orders at all, but tests of frequency-based disorientation fields, an experimental attempt to interfere with Allied airborne radar or even with pilot cognition. When Buchenwald was liberated by the US Third Army on 11 April 1945, Signal Corps personnel accompanied the combat units. Official inventories logged the discovery of radio receivers, a few crude transmitters hidden in SS barracks, and scattered teleprinter equipment. None matched the sophistication implied by the WWII intercepts. An internal report dated 15 April 1945, NARA RG 338, Box 214, notes bluntly, "No evidence of high-frequency test apparatus found. SS Command denies knowledge. Recommend disposal of intercept files." Yet several survivors later recounted odd phenomena in the camp during early 1945. Prisoners forced to work in sealed huts, strong smells of ozone, and SS guards complaining of head noises during night shifts. The trail did not end with liberation. In 1951, the Pentagon fire at the Record Center in St. Louis destroyed swathes of Signal Corps archives. Among the lost collections was the complete set of raw WWII intercepts. Only fragments remain today, carbon copies preserved inadvertently in British liaison files. One such copy, discovered by historian Dr. Helen Firth in 1998, contained the notation, "Test group located near Crematorium 2, overseen by SS Sturmbannführer Hans Kammler." Kammler, notorious for his role in V-2 rocket construction and underground facilities, vanished in May 1945 under contested circumstances. If Kammler directed Project Euler, the technology may have been spirited away with him during his disappearance. Declassified. CIA reports from the early Cold War lend weight to this possibility. A 1952 memorandum to Director Alan Dulles, marked Secret Nothorn, references Soviet acquisition of experimental German apparatus linked to psychotronic research. The memo specifically cites Weimar area confiscations, 1945, as a possible source. Subsequent KGB files smuggled out by defector Vasily Mitrokhin in the 1990s mention equipment from Thüringen concentration camp utilized at Kharkov Radio Institute. Cross-comparison of these documents suggests at least some Buchenwald technology was removed intact before Allied liberation. The human element complicates the story further. Survivors interviewed in the 1960s by West German prosecutors recalled a group of engineers arriving at the camp in late 1944, speaking a mix of German and accented Czech. These men oversaw construction of a low wooden barracks near the north wall, off-limits to prisoners and guarded separately. At night, prisoners reported humming noises emanating from within, followed by sudden migraines and vertigo among those forced to work nearby. In one testimony, preserved in the 1963 Frankfurt War Crimes Trial Archive, a prisoner named Otto Klein described strange lamps that flickered without flame inside the hut. The barracks were later burned by retreating SS, leaving only ash. By the 1970s, interest in the Buchenwald Transmissions had shifted into the domain of Cold War conspiracy. Journalists speculated about Nazi mind control weapons, while fringe writers exaggerated the evidence. Yet within classified NATO files, the matter remained curiously persistent. A 1978 Shape Intelligence Review, Shape SCI 7784, lists Project OWL under a section of Unresolved German War Science. Its footnote acknowledges, no physical remains located, intercept logs partially lost, possible relevance to current Warsaw pact signal disruption techniques. In 1994, researchers gained access to former East German Stasi archives. Among thousands of decaying files was a slim folder labeled Euler Weimar. Inside lay a typed memorandum dated 12 March 1961 from a Stasi officer in Leipzig, reporting on Soviet scientific teams excavating former Buchenwald grounds. The report states that underground cable remnants and metallic coils of unusual manufacture were recovered. No follow-up reports exist, suggesting the Soviets immediately removed the materials to Moscow. The story's unresolved conclusion lies in the silence of officialdom. To this day, neither US nor British archives contain a full account of the intercepts. The few surviving intercept sheets, now digitized, remain unexplained anomalies, random bursts of letters and numbers, with embedded pauses at oddly human-like intervals. No cipher key has ever unlocked them. Engineers studying the signal format in the 2000s noted it resembled not message encoding but pulse modulation experiments. What then were the Buchenwald Transmissions? A final classified British Joint Intelligence Committee note from October 1945, declassified in 2006, offers the most sober assessment. Evidence suggests German SS experiments with novel signal phenomena possibly intending to impair enemy air operations. Data incomplete. Further investigation terminated due to lack of material. The note's final line, however, is handwritten and underlined twice. Origin remains unexplained. Thus, the Buchenwald Transmissions sit in the uneasy space between war crime, lost technology, and archival ghost. Neither wholly confirmed nor entirely dismissed, they represent one of the strangest fragments of the Second World War. A concentration camp doubling as a covert testbed for signals of unknown purpose, its files destroyed in fire, its equipment erased by retreating hands, and its legacy scattered across intelligence archives that refuse to close the case. On 5 July 1943, the Wehrmacht unleashed Operation Citadel, the last great German offensive on the Eastern Front. The ensuing clash around the Kursk salient became the largest tank battle in history. By mid-July, the offensive had collapsed, leaving thousands of destroyed armored vehicles and tens of thousands of dead across the fields of Orel and Belgorod. While Soviet propaganda heralded the victory, less publicized were the secret retrieval missions that followed, orders issued directly from Moscow to secure not just wrecked German tanks, but also sealed railway cars abandoned during the retreat. These operations, recorded in fragmentary NKVD and later KGB files, have remained one of the more unsettling shadows cast by Kursk. The first mention appears in a decrypted NKVD field report dated 22 July 1943, classified Osobaya Papka, Special, Folder. The document details the discovery of 3 armored railway cars near the village of Maloarkhangelsk, abandoned during the rapid German withdrawal. The cars bore markings consistent with Wehrmacht logistics, but inside were crates stenciled Ahnenerbe, referencing the SS Research Institute, notorious for its occult-tinged expeditions and pseudo-scientific experiments. Soviet engineering battalions, operating under the 10th Guards Army, were instructed to secure the cars intact and transfer them east under heavy guard. No official Red Army communiques mention this retrieval, yet a surviving log from the 8th Railway Security Brigade notes unusual consignment, sealed under NKVD supervision, priority to Moscow. What these crates contained is not clear from the surviving Soviet records, but CIA declassified assessments from the early 1990s shed new light. A 1948 CIA memorandum, formerly top secret, describes frantic efforts by American occupation forces to locate scientific materials evacuated by Soviet units from Orel Sector, July 43. The memo speculates that the items related to advanced metallurgical studies and psychological warfare materials. The Americans' urgency stemmed from reports, passed by German prisoners, that the SS had attempted to salvage experimental weapons prototypes from the front, including armor treated with unusual alloys and devices designed for field testing. The implication was that the Soviets had seized not only destroyed hardware, but research shipments intended for Germany's own secret projects. First-hand testimony adds eerie detail. In 1965, a former Soviet engineer named Lev D. Arseniev defected to the West and gave interviews under CIA supervision. He described being attached to a special retrieval team in August 1943, tasked with recovering sealed steel crates from wreck sites near Kursk. According to Arseniev, One crate contained what he believed to be optical devices, unlike Soviet manufacture, possibly gyroscopic. Another, he claimed, contained bound volumes of documents written in Gothic script that were immediately flown to Moscow. Arseniev's statements were never fully corroborated, but they aligned with earlier KGB summaries referencing documentary shipments of the SS Ahnenerbe. German archives lend partial support. A captured Wehrmacht logistics order dated 28 June 1943, only days before the offensive began, directs that materials from Forschungsstelle be transported via the Oral railway junction under armed guard. The order bears the signature of General Major Rudolf Schmundt, Hitler's adjutant, indicating unusually high priority. Yet no subsequent German records mention these shipments. It is as if they vanished during the maelstrom of Kursk, straight into Soviet hands. The trail continued into the post-war period. CIA reports from occupied Germany in 1946-47 describe desperate searches of Soviet-controlled zones, particularly Thuringia and Saxony, for remnants of the Kursk crates. One 1947 OSS successor report even claimed that crates marked Ahnenerbe had been seen in rail yards outside Leipzig under NKVD guard. The Americans suspected the crates were eventually moved into Moscow's special archive, Osoby Archiv, where sensitive captured German documents were stored. Indeed, when fragments of this archive were briefly opened to Western scholars in the 1990s, several catalogue entries referred cryptically to materials from Orel, Ahnenerbe, July 1943. The contents themselves, however, were withheld. The Soviets, for their part, treated the matter with extreme secrecy. A 1952 KGB memorandum, declassified after the fall of the USSR, mentions the oral transport in connection with Project Vostok, a program studying advanced German engineering techniques. The memo suggests that the materials included alloys tested for improved armor resilience, aerodynamic components, and psychological political documentation. This last phrase remains obscure, but some historians speculate it referred to Ahnenerbe files on population control experiments or propaganda methodologies, which Stalin's regime may have found useful during the consolidation of post-war Eastern Europe. One of the more disturbing threads involves testimony from villagers near Maloarkhangelsk. In the late 1980s, Soviet journalists collected oral histories from locals who remembered the summer of 1943. Several recalled strange activity around the abandoned rail cars, NKVD troops cordoning off the site, engineers wearing protective gear, and a lingering chemical odor. One villager claimed that cattle grazing nearby later fell ill and died. If true, this suggests the crates may have contained hazardous substances, possibly chemical agents or experimental fuels. By the Cold War, the Kursk retrievals had slipped into obscurity, buried under official silence. Yet intelligence communities on both sides continued to reference them obliquely. A 1961 CIA analytical paper, still heavily redacted, refers to unresolved Soviet exploitation of German scientific caches, Kursk 1943, underlining its ongoing relevance. A parallel Warsaw Pact document uncovered after 1991 lists captured German special shipments among the assets secured in Moscow's Central Military Archive, alongside V2 research papers and uranium samples taken from Oranienburg. The unresolved nature of the Kursk retrievals raises troubling questions. Were the crates simply technical studies, scavenged from the chaos of the front? Or did they contain something more, materials the SS had sought to protect at all costs, tied to Ahnenerbe's murky investigations into technology and ideology? The secrecy with which both the Soviet Union and the United States pursued the trail suggests more than ordinary battlefield salvage. Today, despite limited access to archives, tantalizing fragments remain. A Russian military historian, Colonel Lieutenant Alexander S. Lutsenko, claims to have seen a sealed file in the Central Archive of the Ministry of Defense labeled Ahnenerbe Transport, Oral Kursk Sector, July 1943. The file was marked, "Do not open until 2045 L." Lutsenko's testimony has never been independently verified, but it echoes a familiar pattern of long-term classification applied to materials deemed too politically or scientifically sensitive. 80 years later, the Kursk retrieval missions sit at the uneasy intersection of battlefield archaeology, secret intelligence competition, and the darkest corners of Nazi research. The fields of Oral and Belgorod still conceal the rusting hulks of Tigers and T-34s, silent witnesses to the ferocious struggle. Yet beneath the wreckage and within sealed Soviet archives lies the unanswered story of the railway cars stenciled Ahnenerbe, a story written in disappearing reports, fragmented testimonies, and files stamped with a single word: Sekretno. In the early hours of 17th of August 1943, more than 500 Royal Air Force bombers roared over the Baltic coast, unleashing the devastating raid known as Operation Hydra. Their target was Peenemünde, the Heeresversuchsanstalt, Germany's premier rocket development center. The mission's official aim was to cripple the V2 program and kill key engineers. But behind the official narrative lies a series of anomalies: missing records, unacknowledged reconnaissance, and a vanished American intelligence team that suggest a shadow war was already unfolding over Peenemünde long before the bombers arrived. The first hints emerge in OSS files dated May 1943. A memorandum addressed to General William Wild Bill Donovan, labeled with the provisional codename Silver Ash, describes an unauthorized transfer of technical material from Peenemünde through neutral Sweden. Swedish customs manifests from Gothenburg's harbour for June 1943 confirm the arrival of unmarked diplomatic crates from Germany, escorted by Reich Foreign Office staff. The crates were exempt from inspection, but a Swedish port log, filed under A. Handelsarkiv 1943-274b, notes their unusual weight-to-volume ratio, suggesting heavy machinery or equipment rather than documents. Shortly afterward, the OSS dispatched a small infiltration team to the Swedish coast to monitor movements, a team that, curiously, never reappears in surviving US records. RAF photo reconnaissance flights add to the mystery. A series of images, captured in late July 1943, reveal not only the familiar rocket assembly halls and launch pads, but also a cluster of small buildings near the shoreline, absent from later maps. The buildings were destroyed during Operation Hydra, yet their purpose remains unknown. A British Air Ministry assessment dated 2nd August 1943 speculates they housed auxiliary test equipment not directly related to A4 program, possibly jet propulsion experiments. The same file contains a red ink annotation. Cross-check with Silver Ash reports. No such reports survive. The fate of the OSS team assigned to Silver Ash remains troubling. Personnel lists from 1943 mention 3 officers: Captain Richard Holbrook, Lieutenant Emil Kruger, and Sergeant Frank Varela, briefly detached to Stockholm under cover of the US legation. By August, their names disappear from rosters. A cable from OSS Bern Station to London, dated 21st August, notes only: Silver Ash compromised, personnel status unknown, do not pursue further. When OSS records were reviewed in the 1950s during the transition to the CIA, Silver Ash's case file was listed as destroyed due to duplication. No duplicates were ever found. Survivor testimony from Sweden complicates the picture further. In 1956, Swedish customs officer Erik Larsson told a parliamentary inquiry into wartime neutrality violations that he had once seen German diplomats unloading long cylindrical canisters, like aircraft parts, from a Baltic freighter into sealed train cars bound for Stockholm. The incident occurred in July 1943, days before Operation Hydra. Larsson's report was classified until the 1990s, when it resurfaced in the Riksarkivet. The timing aligns precisely with the disappearance of the Silver Ash team. Meanwhile, the German side of the story remains equally obscure. Among captured SS records discovered at Nordhausen in 1945 was a partially burned file labeled Sondertransport Peenemünde. The surviving page mentions Gerät 241, not to remain at Heeresversuchsanstalt during Anglo-American bombing threat. Garat 241 has never been identified in any surviving V2 documentation. The implication is that certain experimental devices were removed from Peenemünde just prior to Hydra, possibly routed through neutral territory. If so, Silver Ash may have stumbled onto this movement and paid the price. What these devices were remains the core mystery. Speculation ranges from early jet propulsion turbines linked to the Messerschmitt Me 262 program to radio guidance prototypes intended for long-range missiles. One British intelligence report from October 1943, written weeks after the raid, refers cryptically to anomalous wreckage recovered from Peenemünde. Metallic filaments and coils, consistent with radar frequency experimentation, origin not confirmed. The wreckage was forwarded to TRE in Malvern, but no follow-up exists in the files. Some researchers suggest the Germans were experimenting with radio command links for the V2, a technology far more advanced than the purely ballistic trajectories officially attributed to the weapon. The erasure of Silver Ash is most telling in its absence. Neither US nor British official histories of wartime intelligence mention the codename, and when pressed under Freedom of Information requests, the CIA has repeatedly responded that no responsive documents exist. Yet fragments slip through. In 1974, the US Senate's Church Committee uncovered a list of OSS wartime operations still held under classification. Among them was one entry, blanked out with heavy redaction, but bearing a faint pencil note, Ash Peenemünde. The Soviets also showed interest. Declassified GRU reports from 1945 cite Allied infiltration attempts into Swedish territory in summer '43, suspected Peenemünde related. The Soviets clearly believed the Western Allies were competing for rocket intelligence even before German defeat was certain. One GRU colonel annotated the report. Likely they captured samples, must confirm. Whether this suspicion reflected fact or merely Soviet paranoia is impossible to determine, but it indicates the enduring shadow Silver Ash cast even in rival intelligence assessments. By the late Cold War, Peenemunde's legacy had become the cornerstone of both superpowers' missile programs. Yet certain gaps remain conspicuous. The US Army Ballistic Missile Agency's early technical reports, compiled under Wernher von Braun, lack detailed discussion of several pre-1943 experimental systems hinted at in German records. Some historians argue these gaps reflect nothing more than missing paperwork. Others suspect the knowledge was never recovered, lost with Silver Ash's disappearance, or perhaps buried in archives still sealed. The final chilling reference to Silver Ash comes not from American or British files, but from NATO itself. A 1957 NATO Technical Note, AC 130D21, classified secret and declassified only in part, mentions unverified Allied mission losses in Scandinavia, 1943, concerning German propulsion technologies. A margin note scrawled by a reviewer reads, Silver Ash? The rest of the page is blank, with entire sections redacted. Thus, the story of shadows over Peenemünde remains frozen between fire and silence. The RAF's bombs destroyed much, but in the gaps left behind, in erased personnel rosters, missing OSS reports, and vanished cargo through neutral ports, lurks the possibility of another history. One in which Allied operatives risked everything to intercept Germany's most secret research, only to be swallowed by the Baltic shadows, leaving behind questions that neither archives nor governments seem willing to answer. On 10th September 1945, less than a week after Japan's formal surrender aboard USS Missouri, a cable left Buenos Aires under the encryption protocols of the British Security Coordination, BSC. The document, marked secret and signed by Station Chief William Stevenson, referenced intercepted correspondence between couriers operating out of Mar del Plata. The cable's subject line read simply, Directive 47 want. Within its brief paragraphs lay the blueprint of a post-war network designed to funnel men, money, and material out of Europe and into South America. Though officially ignored for decades, fragments of Directive 47 have since surfaced, revealing the scale of what British agents in Argentina described as a state-sanctioned rat line under diplomatic cover. The directive outlined two key objectives. First, the provision of safe houses across Argentina, Uruguay, and Chile for select SS officers. Second, the concealment of technical consignments transported aboard Kriegsmarine U-boats. While Allied intelligence had already tracked the escape of Nazi officials, Directive 47 identified not merely individuals but shipments, steel containers, length 3.2 meters, fitted with locking bolts, that arrived at Argentine ports under the protection of sympathetic naval officers. One intercepted message specifically referenced U-977, a Type 7IC submarine that surrendered in Mar del Plata on 17 August 1945 after an extraordinary 108-day submerged voyage from Norway. Official records describe the crew arriving exhausted but empty-handed, yet MI6's Buenos Aires files suggest otherwise. Among the declassified fragments is testimony from a port inspector, José Bermejo, who told British interrogators in 1946 that he witnessed sealed tubes offloaded from U-977 at night, transferred directly onto military trucks and driven inland. Bermejo's statement, preserved in FO 371 SAR 59963, was dismissed as unreliable at the time, yet subsequent CIA reviews in the 1950s revisited it with concern. A 1953 CIA memorandum, CIA RDP 8008, SO A00 Fate 003 80016, speculates that non-financial cargo transported via U-977 included navigation apparatus of advanced form, possibly gyroscopic. Such devices were consistent with reports of German research into long-range navigation aids, tested during Kriegsmarine Arctic expeditions in 1944. The human side of Directive 47 is equally troubling. MI6 intercepts revealed the existence of safe houses established in Patagonia, often disguised as German cultural clubs or agricultural colonies. One British surveillance photograph, dated February 1946, depicts a secluded chalet near Bariloche, flying both an Argentine flag and a Reich, or ensign. Though the photograph circulated among Allied intelligence circles, the official Argentine government denied knowledge, attributing the flag to nostalgic settlers. Yet BSC cables make repeated references to high-ranking SS fugitives, among them men associated with the Sicherheitsdienst, being sheltered at such locations. Their names were redacted from the surviving files, but cross-referencing with post-war war crimes indictments suggests individuals tied to Buchenwald and Mauthausen. What remains most enigmatic, however, is the fate of the containers. Allied post-war investigations into Nazi gold and looted art documented shipments routed through Spain and Switzerland, yet the Argentine shipments contain neither bullion nor paintings. Instead, repeated notations in Directive 47 describe Gerät equipment. One fragment even specifies Navigationskern aus Nordlichteinsatz, Navigation Corps from Northern Lights operation, a cryptic phrase that appears nowhere else in surviving German naval files. Researchers have speculated that this may refer to instruments tested during U-boat operations in polar latitudes, possibly linked to attempts at gyrocompass refinement or magnetic anomaly detection. Such technology, if operational, would have been of immense value during the early Cold War submarine race. Attempts to track these shipments during the immediate post-war years were hindered by politics. Britain, struggling to maintain influence in Latin America, pressed for joint investigations with the United States. But Washington, preoccupied with recruiting German scientists under Operation Paperclip, showed little appetite for pursuing fugitives in Argentina. A secret US State Department memo from 1947, Frus 1947 Volume 8, notes bluntly, the pursuit of ex-Nazis in Argentina may compromise relations with Peron, advise caution. The matter was quietly shelved, though low-level field reports continued to flow in. By the 1960s, traces of the Safehouse network resurfaced during the Eichmann affair. When Mossad agents abducted Adolf Eichmann from Buenos Aires in 1960, they stumbled upon references to other fugitives protected by what Israeli intelligence described as a parallel rat line. An internal Mossad memorandum, later quoted in Issa Harel's papers, mentions Directive 47 as a codename encountered during surveillance of German émigrés in Argentina. The document states, containers associated with naval landings remain unaccounted for. This suggests that even 15 years later, the shadow of U-977's mysterious cargo had not faded. The Cold War layered further secrecy upon the case. A declassified NATO briefing paper from 1958, circulated under the innocuous title Naval Research Assets, includes a redacted section acknowledging the possibility that advanced German gyroscopic devices are in circulation outside of Europe, likely Argentina. A handwritten note in the margin reads, related to 47. The implication is clear. Even as NATO pursued its technological edge against the Soviet Union, doubts lingered about whether Nazi devices had slipped into unauthorized hands across the Atlantic. In Argentina, rumors persisted into the 1970s. Fishermen off Mar del Plata spoke of sealed containers dumped into coastal waters, guarded by naval patrols. Local police in Patagonia occasionally raided German enclaves, only to be ordered to stand down. A 1977 Argentine naval defector, interviewed in Madrid, claimed that one of the containers from U-977 had been stored for decades in a warehouse near Ushuaia before being quietly shipped north during the junta years. His account remains unverified, yet echoes long-circulated suspicions that the containers never remained in one place. Today, the Argentine Safehouse Directive occupies a peculiar status in historical research. At once too specific to dismiss, yet too fragmentary to confirm. The surviving documents, cables, port manifests, interrogation notes do not form a complete picture, yet their consistency across British, American, and Israeli archives suggests a reality more complex than Allied governments publicly acknowledged. Whether Directive 47's containers carried nothing more than navigational prototypes, or something darker, chemical agents, classified research papers, or even early missile components, remains locked behind layers of silence. What is certain is that Argentina became not just a refugee for men, but a vault for material. The U-977's long voyage, the intercepted cables, and the secrecy of post-war politics all point to a deliberate, coordinated effort to transplant fragments of the Third Reich into South America. 78 years later, the full truth remains, scattered across sealed files in London, Langley, and Buenos Aires, files that still, in their margins, whisper the words, Directive 47. The stories fade, not with resolution, but with silence, the kind that echoes louder than truth. Behind locked vaults and scorched pages, fragments remain, rusted hulls, vanished codes, directives that still breathe in the margins of forgotten files. Perhaps these secrets were buried to protect us, or perhaps to conceal something darker still. In the end, the war never truly ended. It sank into the shadows where the past waits, restless for someone willing to look.